In the news tonight, an operation to evacuate thousands of civilians and fighters from Aleppo is underway as part of a deal to end years of fighting for the city. France's president urges a summit of EU leaders to issue a call for a ceasefire in Aleppo. And Iraqis who fled Mosul are enduring tough winter conditions with shortages of fuel and food. Good evening and welcome to the news on 10. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign and Expatriate Affairs Nasser Judeh briefed the lower house of Foreign Affairs Committee on regional developments and challenges. He spoke about regional issues including the Palestinian issue and the situation in Syria and Iraq. Judeh said Jordan's foreign policy is based on mutual respect and non-intervention in the affairs of countries. The minister stressed Jordan's call for a political solution to the Syrian crisis and the refugees issue. An operation to evacuate thousands of civilians and fighters from the Syrian city of Aleppo is underway. The evacuation is a part of a ceasefire deal that would end years of fighting for the city. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad said in a video statement the taking of Aleppo was a historic moment. A second 15-bus convoy carrying evacuees from rebel-held districts of Aleppo left for the countryside to the west. The International Committee of the Red Cross evacuated close to 1,000 civilians and 26 wounded, including several children. More in this report.
An operation to evacuate thousands of fighters and residents from Aleppo is fully underway as the government strengthens its grip on the city. Long lines of green buses are ready to take evacuees out of Aleppo. Syrian state television showed the convoy of ambulances followed by a long line of green buses driving from Al-Ramusa district next to the rebel-held area of Aleppo. The green government buses had been parked alongside Red Crescent vehicles to allow people to flee the remaining areas, which are not yet under total government control. Close to 1,000 civilians and 26 wounded, including several children, were evacuated from East Aleppo. And the international community of the Red Cross expects to double the number by day's end.
We have estimation of 400 or 500 cases that need hospitalization and maybe needing surgery. But there is unlimited cases, we're talking about thousands of cases that need post-operation services because there were no medical services or shortage. So it's like 10% of the medical services were really operating in eastern Aleppo, especially after it became a besieged area.
Russian Defense Ministry said over 3,000 rebels and their family members had left Aleppo. According to the ministry, they were evacuated via a humanitarian corridor 21 kilometers in length towards Idlib province. Russia uses drones to monitor how rebels and their families are transported on buses accompanied by 10 ambulances. Syria had guaranteed their safety. Buses and ambulances started moving into rebel-held areas of the city under a deal to evacuate civilians and fighters following rapid advances by government forces. Hala Debabne for the news at 10.
French President François Hollande said he wanted a summit of EU leaders to issue a call for a ceasefire in Aleppo to allow civilians and the wounded to be evacuated. He said as he arrived at the meeting in Brussels that Europe must make its voice heard. British Prime Minister Theresa May echoed Hollande's calls for a ceasefire and said Iran and Russia bore some responsibility for the bloodshed in the city.
We also need to robustly condemn what is happening in Syria. President Assad and his backers in Russia and Iran bear responsibility for the tragedy in Aleppo. What we must be doing is ensuring that those who are responsible for these atrocities are held to account. We must also do all we can to ensure that a ceasefire is secured so the United Nations can help to bring to safety the innocent people of Aleppo. And finally,
Arab League countries held an emergency meeting condemning Syrian government's handling of the ceasefire and evacuation in Aleppo. They called on the United Nations to move quickly to provide relief to the Syrian people. The meeting of representatives convened at Qatar's request, which along with Saudi Arabia have been among the main supporters of rebels fighting forces of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Arab League foreign ministers are expected to meet on Monday to discuss the situation further. The Pan-Arab Organization addressed the United Nations Security Council and called for an emergency General Assembly meeting to take responsibility for the situation in Syria.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, my government has called for an emergency UN General Assembly meeting where it will assume responsibility for the protection and safety of Syria. This is due to the incompetence and failure of the Security Council to stop the military operations and exterminations that the Syrian regime and its allies conduct against the innocent and the civilians.
Up to 70 Daesh fighters were killed in an Iraqi airstrike on a post of the terror group west of Mosul. The Iraqi military said its anti-terrorism forces also repelled an attack by Daesh in Mosul and killed 20 attackers. Tens of thousands of civilians have fled their homes nearly 2 months into the campaign to retake the Daesh-held stronghold. Iraqis living in refugee camps are enduring tough conditions with shortages of fuel and food and water as winter sets in. In the Khazar refugee camp near the Kurdish city of Erbil, families fleeing from the city complained of harsh living conditions after rainfall and mud flooded their tents. The United Nations said 91,000 people have been registered as displaced from Mosul and nearby towns and villages. The figure excludes thousands more forced back into Mosul by retreating militants. A bill extending U.S. sanctions against Iran for 10 years will become law without President Barack Obama's signature. The White House said this will not affect implementation of the international accord limiting Iran's nuclear program. A White House statement said the administration has made clear that an extension of the Iran Sanctions Act is entirely consistent with the U.S. commitments in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Egyptian air accident investigators said traces of explosives had been found on the remains of victims of an Egyptian flight that crashed en route from Paris to Cairo. Flight MS-804 plunged into one of the deepest parts of the Mediterranean Sea on May 19, killing all 66 people on board. Egypt's investigation committee issued a statement saying the coroner had found traces of explosives on the remains of some victims. It gave no more details, but said its findings were sent to prosecutors investigating foul play. An Egyptian source familiar with the matter said Egypt had informed France months ago about its findings, but French investigators had requested more time to study them. Syria was on the agenda when Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Russian President Vladimir Putin held talks in a resort in Japan. A Japanese government spokesman said Abe conveyed to Putin his concern over the deteriorating humanitarian situation, and Putin offered to work with other countries to settle the Syrian problem. Russia faces Western criticism over the destruction of eastern Aleppo, where Russia is backing the Syrian government. At their summit, the Japanese and Russian leaders agreed to revive security talks and start discussing economic cooperation on disputed islands at the core of a row that has kept them from signing a peace treaty formally ending World War II. The security talks were suspended after Russia annexed the Crimea region in 2014, triggering Western sanctions. Yahoo warned it had uncovered yet another massive cyber attack. It said data from more than 1 billion user accounts was compromised in August 2013, making it the largest breach in history. The number of affected accounts was double the scope of an attack in 2014 that the internet company disclosed in September, which affected at least 500 million accounts. Yahoo said it believed the incident disclosed was likely distinct from the one it reported in September. The company said it has not been able to identify the intrusion associated with the theft. Yahoo said the stolen user account information may have included names, email addresses, telephone numbers, dates of birth, hashed passwords, and in some cases, incorrupted or unincorrupted security questions and answers. Yahoo shares fell almost 5% after the disclosure. Real Madrid booked their place in the Club World Cup final by beating Club America 2-0, although FIFA's new video technology was again the taking point. Win or lose, Bernard Hopkins' legacy is secure in the world of boxing, but the all-time great is looking to add one more victory to his record as he enters the ring, presumably for the last time on Saturday. At a news conference in California, the boxer promised not to look back at his long and storied 29-year career, instead opting to focus on the future of his upcoming fight with light heavyweight contender Joe Smith. During his career, Hopkins held multiple world titles at middleweight and light heavyweight and held the middleweight championship from 1994 until 2005.
Technique, and more importantly, keeping that attitude, that championship attitude.
And finally, the cold spell will continue across many regions tonight with 3 degrees in Amman and partly cloudy skies. Frost formation past midnight, mainly in the eastern and southern regions, is also in the forecast. Tomorrow it will be relatively cold in most regions, with a slim chance for light showers in the north. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a warmer day Friday with a high of 20 degrees, northerly winds and somewhat choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to close our top stories once again, an operation to evacuate thousands of civilians and fighters from Aleppo is underway as part of a deal to end years of fighting for the city. France's president urges a summit of EU leaders to issue a call for a ceasefire in Aleppo. And Iraqis who fled Mosul are enduring tough winter conditions with shortages of fuel and food. And with that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Leo Balkar. Have a lovely weekend and I will see you tomorrow.